All right, I think we are actually live on Facebook here again. We skipped a week last week, Preston. What happened?
Well, I don't know if you've forgotten, but we're running a big congressional campaign for Congressional District 11. So we got caught up a little bit in doing some other things, but that's probably my fault.
Well, you know how I like to blame you. I am aware that we are running a campaign for US Congress. In fact, I am also aware that I believe we are now 70 days from the election.
That is true.
Seven
Yes.
zero, 7-0. Unbelievable. Well, listen, I wanted to jump on today in particular because the Republican National Convention started last night. And I have to be honest, I did not watch the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces of some of the different speeches. And I can't say that I am surprised by the tone, but what is interesting is that the administration and the Republican Party was sort of previewing ahead of time that they were going to have this upbeat, positive tone. And in reality, they did just the opposite. They had this very dark, world is ending, you know, we're coming for your babies and your dogs sort of tone. And you know, we both have dogs, which is why I had to throw the dogs in there. But you
Yeah.
know, I was listening to some of it this morning, and I just find the whole thing so incredibly frustrating because it to me feels like such clear manipulation and rhetoric that I have to imagine that anybody that is watching would get that. But clearly, that's not the case. There are people that are just accepting what they're saying and buying into the message. And the message that I heard predominantly is one of fear and divisiveness, but mostly fear. Um, and I know I'm so dorky. This is me being a dork, but I immediately thought of FDR, and the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Because I felt like fear itself is what has arrived on our doorstep, not the fears that the people that spoke last night at the RNC want you to be engaged in and afraid of, but the fear. I am afraid now of the fear itself, right? And
Yeah.
so I wanted to do a little homework because I am a dork, but as my daughter will tell you, who is a history buff, I am not a history buff. So I don't have those quotes like all in my brain like some people do. So I looked up the actual quote by FDR, and let's see if I can pull it up and read it because it's longer than what I think people realize. So I'll just read the beginning part and we'll go from there. But this is from FDR's inaugural address in 1933, I believe it was. And he says, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." So to simplify that, because that was, you know, some fancy words, he's basically saying fear of the unknown, you know, unfounded fear gets in the way of progress.
Well,
And
and just to peek behind the curtain, you read me that before we started here, and I had not heard probably the second part of that since maybe school, I guess. But it, I had always thought of it as a wartime saying, right? We stand together and we're not afraid of whoever the enemy is. But really, I think he's seeing it as more of a tool for manipulation. That if we start holding that as high in our head, as our brain wants to, that we're afraid of something, then we can be manipulated in some ways that are unhealthy and bad for the future, which is, I think, what we're talking about today.
right, and look, there is a reason why humans have a lizard brain, right, and have a natural fight or flight response, right? We are meant to be afraid because it saves us, it preserves us, right? If we recognize a predator, then we know either hide or run or fight back or whatever the case may be. But our brains are programmed that way. And look, I don't come from the world of politics, I come from the world of business. And for me, like that, talking about the lizard brain and talking about our fear response is such a normal part of the conversation around leadership. But somehow in politics, there's like this assumption that we all don't know that, like that we don't recognize that.
Yeah, well, and I came from the world of advertising and PR, and there was a saying there that I can't remember, but the essential point is if somebody is doing it and they continue to do it, it's probably because it works. And the difference I think that we lose when we go from the world of advertising to politics is just because it works doesn't make it okay. Just because it preys on people's worst instincts doesn't make it the thing that you should use to get what you want, basically.
It's really funny because when I was doing my talk radio show, back when it was all focused on business and technology, I started coming up with, a little bit over time, I would add to this, but I started coming up with sort of like Dana's rules for, living kind of a stress-free life. And the number one rule was don't be stupid. And that was just like the easiest. That was my number one parenting rule too. Like, you're going to do things, but if you just always have mom on your shoulder saying, don't be stupid, that's going to get you a long way.
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah.
Right. It was just like a pretty standard rule for living. And the second rule was, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that gets back to exactly what you're saying. Just because fear works as a tool of manipulation, in this arena of politics, in this arena of leadership, it is not a fair tool to use. And we, the people, have to recognize it for what it is. We have to call it out for what it is.
I want to put my consultant brain on for a second, my politics brain on for a second, because, I like to occasionally go back and read I believe it's called internally the moratorium that the Republican Party wrote after Mitt Romney lost. And essentially what it says is we have to reach, younger white women because they're leaving us. We have to reach Hispanics because they're leaving us at a rate that we can't handle. And part of what I was thinking about watching last night was that you, Dana Barrett, are essentially a target for some of the messaging. The Republican Party has over time started really like hemorrhaging away suburban white women. So as a target for that messaging, do you think it is effective?
Well, so that's I think sort of part of where I was heading with this. I am that target. You're exactly right. I am exactly that. A suburban white woman who raised my child and in public school in the suburbs. That's me. And who cares about, I was a working single mom. And for me, that was also about it. So I did care about preserving the money I made. I didn't want to give it all to the government and taxes, things like that. I also, however, cared about my neighbors and such, but I digress. What I was getting to, I think, is that moms in suburbia and women in suburbia right now are dealing with real, genuine fear of real things. There are so many suburban women right now who are homeschooling their kids or trying to figure out, can they take their kids back to school? Is it safe? When we have no real guidance, no real leadership nationwide about how schools should open, when schools should open, what they should do if there's an outbreak of coronavirus. So parents are struggling with this real fear of taking care of their kids in this moment and continuing their livelihoods in this moment. And what if their child doesn't get super sick, but brings home coronavirus and then grandma gets sick? Or, Aunt Sally who has asthma gets sick, or whatever else. So these are real fears that people are dealing with. And certainly suburban women are also dealing with, real financial fears right now. Maybe one of the two, husband and wife, are out of work. Maybe a single parent is out of work. I mean, these are genuine fears about what's happening in this country right now that we should be addressing. And instead you have, Donald Trump Jr. Getting on the stage last night and talking about, Democrats want to take away your freedom of speech. They want to end the suburbs altogether. I can't remember who said that, but one of them was like, they want to end the suburbs, demolish the suburbs. Like, what? And by the way,
what the president said, by the way, too. So that person certainly wasn't speaking alone.
Right, and certainly everybody heard I would think that everybody heard the racial dog whistles on that. And by the way, talking about the fears of white suburban women is sort of also interesting in this moment where, it's been exposed like week after week, day after day, what living in America as a Black person is like. We just had another shooting in which a policeman shot a Black man in the back. And so, you hear all the time about people discussing those real fears. And yet here comes Donald Trump Jr., here comes Donald Trump, here comes Kimberly Guilfoyle, here comes one after the next last night at the RNC saying, the evil Democrats are coming to take away your country, your monuments, your freedoms, your this, your that. And it's so sad for me to watch that. And to realize that there are people who are hearing that and are getting that anxiety response and saying, oh yes, I should be afraid. Oh yes, I should. And based on that fear, I should join in that divisive messaging, that cry of the other is evil. I think somebody's speech last night, actually, I want to say it was Donald Trump Jr., literally referred to Joe Biden as the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah, he said he's the Loch Ness Monster of the swamp. Is continuing a metaphor that they broke 5 years ago. Yeah.
There. But nonetheless, you're putting these pictures in people's minds of monsters and, terror and MS-13 who's going to move in next door to you. And, as I sort of joked when we started, eat your babies, and people are just feeling the tone of that, and they're hearing those words and they're feeling that fear. And I truly believe that the fear itself has become the problem. We are, previous presidents, most would win their seat and then say, okay, I was maybe a bit negative during my campaign, but now I'm president for all America, and I am going to bring us together. I am going to, work with Democrats and Republicans. I'm going to support you, rich, poor, or otherwise, Black, white, or otherwise. I'm the president of everybody. And they worked over their term to unify. This president never did that. He never stepped away from the divisive messaging. And instead, he's built on it, and it's become more and more and more inflamed. This is a time like no other, where people are legitimately getting divorced because they're on opposite sides politically. People are, abandoning friends they've had for years, where they managed in prior administrations to have opposing views but talk civilly to one another. And that isn't happening anymore. And it's the leadership of this country currently that has to take responsibility for that.
So is this a policy problem, or is this a rhetoric problem? And I'm personally, I've always been of the mind that those things for presidents and for other elected leaders can many times be just as important as each other. As I think you have a responsibility to lead not just with what you sign into law, but also how you go about doing your business. So which one is it, and how do we, it's, again, this show has become Dana solves the insurmountable problems of the world every Tuesday or whatever it is. So I'm not really being super fair to you, but if you had to pick a place to start.
Well, look, I hear what you're saying. And is this a specific policy problem? Not the way I'm painting it in this conversation. That said, I think when you walk into any policy conversation where, half of the people at the table are being villainized from the get-go, it only forces them to not be listened to not be taken seriously. And how do you ever come to an agreement if you have painted each other across the table as evil and with bad intent? And I think, look, at the end of the day, I think we have to take a big step back. And I truly believe, I have to be careful how I phrase this, because I don't want to say there are good people on both sides. But but look, I genuinely believe that most people who ascribe to a Republican ideology do it for sincere reasons and still want the best for their neighbors and their community and all of those things. Now, do I agree with everything they believe? No. But I also say that most Democrats are the same way, who come to their beliefs and their ideals with the best intention and want to do the best they can by their neighbors and their families and themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not a specific policy fear and divisiveness is not a specific policy problem, but it is the poison that ruins policy making, I think, at every level. And again, to go back to my history in corporate America, leaders of corporations are not generally the doers, right? They are the leaders. They are the ones making the high level decisions and setting the tone, steering the ship, and letting everyone else get the work done. So it is the job of the leaders to set the tone that will facilitate work getting done. This divisive messaging is the opposite of that. And that's been proven over the last 3.5 years. So again, I really feel like, and I said this probably 2 times ago when we got on Facebook Live, we have to start asking the right questions of our leaders. We have to know who they are in their hearts. We have to know their character. We have to know what they're going to do in an unknown situation. And listening to someone spout that kind of demonizing rhetoric should be a giant red flag.
Right. And I hadn't thought of this before we started this conversation, but I believe, I'm sure in the Facebook comments, I will get fact checked, which is great. But I believe today is the 2-year anniversary of John McCain's death. And he is one of those figures that comes to mind for me, mainly because I was in high school, which shows how I think young I am. But I was in high school when he ran for president and had a supporter at one of his rallies attempt to stoke fear. Now, she was stoking fear through a racist statement, but she was attempting to stoke fear. And John McCain took a step back and said, my opponent is a family man who I just happen to have some fundamental disagreements with on how to get to the best country possible. And I don't know what planet we would have to be on for me to see that happen today. I mean, and we have gone far from the moment. And I think there are a lot of problems to be attributed to that. The kind of energy that certain people think they can fundraise off of is certainly like one thing that I think raises the stakes constantly. But I think, as you said, it's important to ask more out of the people that we give jobs to rather than just constantly fight for re-election the whole time.
I agree. And I remember that John McCain moment that you're referring to quite clearly. I can actually picture the scene in which that happened. And he said, no, 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 stop. No, what you're saying is wrong. No, this is a good man. And you're right. We don't hear that anymore. And we should. I'm sure I said this at some point along the way on the radio, but, we teach our kids in sports, to kind of go in, shake hands with the other team, then get on the field, fight as hard as they can. And then, when they win or lose, to go back and shake the hands of the other team, right? That's what a campaign should look like. When you get on the soccer field or in the boxing ring or whatever sport it is, the other person isn't evil. They're just your opponent in this particular match. That doesn't make them evil or bad. It doesn't mean you'd want to win any less. But we have now turned this into a good versus evil lineup that you can't come back from. I wish we could get back to a unifying place. And I have said all along, one of the reasons I decided to run was because when I was doing talk radio and I was focused on politics 2 hours a day, every day, I became more and more and more frustrated with the fact that nothing was getting done. And in large part, that was because of how divided we had become. There was no reaching across the aisle anymore. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to run, because I am a moderate and I want to get in there and work with moderates and everybody. I want to work with the big tent of what should be the big tent of the American government, not the big tent of the Democrats or the big tent of the Republicans. It should be a place where all of our American ideas and ideals can come together, be discussed openly without spewing hatred and name calling, and where decisions can be made.
Well, and the fear that we're talking about does not dodge DC and the people who work there. I mean, there's a constant fear that cripples the current representatives to, either be afraid of a primary challenger or work with the other side, and they know that the other side is going to use that against them. So it kind of moves both ways.
Well, I have said before, and I don't want to belabor this topic too much more, but I have said before that, one of the reasons I'm also getting into the system is because I was sort of the armchair analyst on the side, right? I was the one sort of sitting there saying, oh, that's bad, and that's wrong, and that's bad, and well, that's pretty good, and that's bad. And I realized that I'm not moving the needle here. I'm talking to my bubble. Everybody's on board. They all agree with me. This is great.
Yeah, you're
But
yelling at the TV. Yeah.
I'm yelling at the TV, or I'm yelling on the airwaves, or whatever it is. And the reality is that I believe in order to change the system, you have to get in the system. And to your point, I think once you're in the system, that's not enough. You still have to play the game to some extent, because if you're immediately thrown out because you didn't play the game, then you're still not going to affect change. So how do you walk the line and play the game enough where you can still get the real views of real Americans onto the floor of the House, onto the floor of the Senate, into legislation that's written and signed by the president, right? And in my opinion, the only way to do that is to continue to elect more, not just to elect me, although I would love that, but to elect more and more and more good people on both sides of the aisle for the right reasons, and to not be driven by your lizard brain and by fear.
Yeah, and I know we're getting close to wrapping up here, but I was watching, I was watching something yesterday where it was the last president, Barack Obama, speaking to his White House interns, and this intern asked a question that I constantly have for our leaders, which is, how do you know when to compromise and how do you know to stick to your guns? Because some people would say compromise on some issues is not warranted. Some people would say things are black and white. And he said, essentially his answer boiled down to, I didn't care about the Affordable Care Act. I cared about more people having healthcare tomorrow than had healthcare today. And, part of it has to be putting your personal pride aside, understanding when the goal can be the same on both sides, but how we're getting there is different. And I think that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about these issues of criminal justice reform where something has to be done, or climate change where something has to be done. But it's the idea that we both want the same thing. We want a better economy, want a better future for kids. But the idea that someone else, because they have a different way to get there, now deserves to be demonized and hates our country.
Right. I mean, I think you're exactly right. We, first of all, I said this a million times too. Compromise is not a dirty word. If it gets us to progress, then sometimes you have to compromise. You can't get everything you want all the time. That's not how it works. And that's okay. And I agree with exactly what you were saying, from Obama's perspective. We need affordable and accessible healthcare in this country. It's a perfect example of what's gone wrong over the last, 3.5 years. Because neither side can compromise, because the right won't even listen or doesn't even have another plan, nothing has gotten done, nothing, except more dismantling of the current care. So, those are the kinds of things where people need to get in a room, turn the cameras off, get the whiteboards out, have real ideas, and try to come up with something that's going to help as many as possible. Is it going to help everybody? Maybe not, but one step forward is better than none. A half a step forward is better than none. And again, we only get that if we stop fear mongering and we stop, demonizing, and we start actually talking to each other.
So for everybody watching, I know we're about to wrap up, but please feel free to post questions in the comments. We will get to them the next time we do one of these, or we will get to them in that comments feed. Share this around. If this is your first time seeing Dana on your feed, you can go to electdanabarrett.com and learn a little bit more about it there. But I'll let you give your final plug too, and then we can sign off to everybody.
Well, I don't know that I have a final plug per se. We've been working hard on so many different aspects of this campaign. We've got 70 days left. My opponent is Barry Loudermilk, and he is not saying my name. He is doing exactly to me what I just talked about at the RNC, which is he is lumping me in and saying that I'm a socialist and I'm a pawn of the Democratic Party and I'm a pawn of AOC and I'm a pawn of Nancy Pelosi. And the fact of the matter is, that's just not true. I've never met AOC. I've never spoken to her. I have a picture that I took with Nancy Pelosi in a line with a whole bunch of other people. And literally, I think she said, "Nice to meet you."
At a book signing or something like that? Yeah.
At a political rally. It was a John Lewis event. I got to get in line and get a picture with her. That is my full contact with Nancy Pelosi. The Democratic Party is not targeting this district like Loudermilk would have you believe. So the only person Loudermilk should be running against is me. And instead he's stoking fear in our district that somehow the evil, far left machine is coming in to take his seat. It's just not true. So like everything else, I ask people to fact check, do their homework, send us an email. I will happily get on the phone with anybody who wants to talk about what I'm running on for, why, who I am, my background, all of those things. Our website has much more on it than it used to. If you haven't been back to our website in a little while, we do have much more of our policy positions there, and there will still be more to come. We've got some position papers that are going to be coming out shortly. So stay tuned for all of that. We're going to try to stay as focused as we can on the issues and just keeping it real. So on that note, we will be back hopefully another time either this week or early next week, and we will see you then.
Bye, everybody.